Jeremy threw up a couple of profile pictures of me from my LinkedIn profile, which I absolutely must change because I forgot that I'd put them up there. So I thought I'd explain a little bit about myself and my background, because if you're talking about AI and you're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future, and somebody tells you something, somebody predicts something, it's probably a good idea to figure out if you can trust that person, whether they have any credibility, whether they have any background. And I've got a slightly weird background, which you can probably start to figure out by looking at those pictures. The only thing I think was obviously wrong is, although they do get older, they seem to get more hair, and I'm not quite sure that's quite right. You know what it's like when you get to a certain age. So Walter White at the beginning. So my background initially is science. I started out in molecular genetics. That's kind of what I live and breathe and where my background is. I still actively keep an interest in life sciences and everything else that is happening in that sector. We've got a lot of clients who are in the life science sector. I just love it. I think it's just fascinating. So that's kind of my early background. I flipped quite quickly to become a computer geek. I ended up with a master's in computer science from UCL. And that's how I ended up earning a living. I became a programmer. I spent the best part of my professional career programming. Interestingly, one of the early projects I was working on was typesetting. This was before the Apple Mac came out, but I built a system which effectively automated a lot of the early typesetting systems, effectively putting out of work a whole collection of people. I wasn't even thinking about that at the time, but it's cognizant of what's going on at the moment, where you think about AI changing jobs, computer programming is changing jobs. I was part of that early wave, which hopefully those people were re-employed. But I know what it's like. I know what it means to work in this industry. I worked in the city for many years. Ended up as operations director as a software company building CRM systems for investment banks. We sold that company. I ended up in America and flipped again. I became VP marketing for a NASDAQ quoted company, which is where I ended up with my marketing credentials. Loved that, had a fantastic 3 years in New York. Came back, raised $6 million US from the venture capital world to start the whole process over again. So I know what's happening with VCs, where the money flows go, how actual deals are done at that scale. That particular operation, although if I were to explain it to you now, sounds like a good idea. It was. We hired 30 people. We had Goldman Sachs as partners. But we ended up shutting it down because just as we were getting going, 2 planes crashed into the world trade. And suddenly nobody knew what they were going to do. So we had to give our money back and walk away. And obviously I just became a professional photographer because that's what you do. You can see, I need another guy with a camera in there. Did that for a while, built up the business, taught myself search engine optimization. This is slide 1, right? There's 50 slides here. Built up my business and used search engine optimization to drive that business. At the end of that process, we had teams of photographers all over the UK. We were #1 for a whole plethora of terms entirely driven by digital marketing. As that business I saw didn't have much of a history because we ended up with the financial crisis in 2008, I could see that was not going to grow in the same way. But we were getting a lot of consultancy. People were saying, look, Clwyd, I don't want to hire you as a photographer, but how did you do that internet thing? So long story short, that's how I started up Whitehat. That's how I became a businessman. And that's sort of how we are today. We found HubSpot, we grew. And we're currently a company of about 15 people with partnerships around the world and some fantastic clients and a brilliant team. So that's kind of my background, why I think I've got something to say. As a programmer, I've worked and coded AI systems all the way back to the 1990s, the early neural nets. So I've hand-coded these things myself. I know how difficult it is. I know what's involved in building them, and I've been following it very, very closely ever since. The AI bubble, if you want to call it, has just taken off since ChatGPT. You saw the stats from Jeremy earlier, but these are just some of the headlines that I picked up. News clickbait, fear and doubt. The interesting one over here, Elon is obviously involved in lots of different things. At one point, he asked for a pause for AI development work, and in the next sentence, next day set up his own AI company. So you can figure out the motives behind one of those things. The scary thing is that a lot of these predictions and discussions have a ring of truth to them. So I'm not here to tell you to ignore them. I'm here to tell you to think very deeply about them. Now, I could spend this presentation doing a deep dive into what HubSpot's doing in this space. You know, Dharmesh, if you've seen his ChatSpot tool, is just fantastic. I could do an entire presentation on it. It's wonderful, but I'm not going to do that. I think we as a group, as individuals, as companies, as marketers, as salespeople, it's up to us to educate and teach those around us, because I genuinely think there are some seismic shifts that are coming, being driven by this technology. And it's going to come through in waves, and it's going to come through in really weird ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what I've learned in all of my years working with AI is if you think you understand AI, then you really don't understand AI. Apologies to Richard Feynman, if anybody knows Richard Feynman. The quote was, if you think you understand quantum physics, you really don't understand quantum physics, but it applies. The interesting thing is that if you talk to the developer community, the people who are building these models, and you ask them, you know, how does it work? How did it come up with this idea, this answer? They genuinely don't know. They genuinely do not know how these systems work. As a programmer, these systems do not have code. You can't go into the program, and if it gives the wrong answer, say I looked up my profile and it said I went to Harvard and did all these things and it's not true, you can't go in the code and change that. You can't see it. It's a learning system. You end up with a massive collection of numbers which look completely random. And if you open up these files, you cannot see. You can put wrappers around it and filters and all these other things, and you can try and teach it and train it, but sometimes you just have to go back to basics. So Stephen Hawking famously said AI will either be the best or the worst thing ever. And this last quote, I'm not sure if anybody would be able to pick this one up. Every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can be, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. Now, I don't know, if I were to say that to anybody, I'd get a hot debate, and most people say, oh no, don't be ridiculous, emotional intelligence is never going to happen, like, the machine's not going to be able to do this, it's not going to be able to do that. That quote is from Alan Turing. So if anybody wants to argue with Alan Turing, then please go ahead. There was an interesting study, and I do read the science papers on this. People talk about emotional intelligence, and Jeremy gave a whole presentation about how salespeople are never going to be replaced because you need empathy, right? You need to engage with your potential clients. The study that they did, pitting ChatGPT against doctors in a sort of double-blind test where people didn't know the other person at the other end of the chat, was that the ChatGPT was more empathetic, more interested in them, and ended up giving better diagnostic and guidance than the professional doctors. So make of that what you will. There's lots of scare stories out there, and it's really important not to get scared because, well, you know, if we're all going to die, then we're going to die, but you might as well be happy on the way. Like I said before, there's different waves of this. There's going to be short, medium, and long term. Nobody knows what long term is going to look like. But in the short term, what we're going to see is more on the left and less on the right. And there's two elements to this. The CoPilot is a phrase that Microsoft have been pushing recently, and I think it's a really good way of imagining how AI is going to help us again, it was mentioned this morning, everybody's going to have a CoPilot. And the way I think about this is, if you were able as a company to hire a top graduate from any university in the world, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, wherever it was, and you could put them as an assistant next to you, that's equivalent to kind of what we've got now or getting with the ChatGPT systems. Quick question for the room. I know you put your hands up when everybody said, have you used ChatGPT? Slight twist on that. Are you using ChatGPT 4, the paid version? Anybody? Smaller number. First recommendation is go and sign up. Pay some money, use it. It is an order of magnitude better. It is more sophisticated. It is more subtle. It is more intelligent, and I've got to be careful how I use that word. It has a deep understanding of motive and theory of mind, which gets kind of scary, but it's also fantastic. But this idea of a co-pilot, going back to this idea of hiring an intern or a new recruit, you could have that person sitting next to you, and you could get them to do anything you want, but they don't know your business yet, right? So they don't have the nuances, they don't understand your buyer personas, the buyer's journeys, all of these different things, but they're super bright. Now, if you could have that, and you could have that person sit next to every single person in your company. Tomorrow, unlimited questions. Pretend we're still in COVID, it's lockdown, so you're going to have to talk to them through a chat system. They're not actually going to be sitting next to you, you're going to talk to chat. That's kind of where we are. Now, what's going to happen in that world to productivity in your company and to those around you? I'm going to tell you, it's going to collapse. It's all going to go horribly wrong very, very fast. Not that that person is not good at what they do, but they don't know you, your business, all of these different things, so you're going to have to teach them. And the classic thing about putting people on a team and hoping to make things go faster is it has the opposite effect in the short term. So what happens is, and this is happening now, not just ChatGPT, but all the other systems out there, they're shiny objects. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but they're a distraction. So just be careful of that, be cognizant of it. Super powerful, but super distracting. Stop, breathe, think a little bit. To go back, this isn't something new. This sometimes people think overnight we've got an AI explosion. Well, AI has been exploding for a while. It was Alan Turing in the 1950s who suggested the famous test where he said, can machines think? And he gave some specific examples of how he would test a machine through a chat interface. And this, remember, is 1950s computing. And he came up with things like, could it write a sonnet about the Fourth Road Bridge? Or could it multiply these numbers? Or could it have a conversation? Could it explain a joke? And he laughably said that, this is obviously some time in the future, but he believed that computers would one day be able to do all of those things. And I actually typed those things into ChatGPT, and yes, it wrote a sonnet about the Fourth Road Bridge and answered all of his other questions. There has been a number of successes and a number of famous failures over the years with AI. And these failures, not specifically, but as an industry, contributed to what's known as the AI winter, or winters, where the hype cycle grew, everybody thought that the most amazing things were going to happen, and then suddenly nothing did. And then the venture capital money was taken away, everybody went and did something else for a while, and then it all built up again. In the early days, when people were just talking about AI, that was the first in the 70s. In the 80s, we ended up with expert systems, which had a lot of promise. These massive, great systems with rules built in, if, then, else. But they just became so complex and so difficult to manage that nobody could actually do very much interesting with them. So the whole thing went down again and collapsed. And then what actually happened is that the deep learning, the neural nets, started to do interesting things, and they only started to do interesting things when the compute size and the data sizes got very, very large. And this is where things started to happen, specifically with companies like DeepMind, based in London, who eventually were bought out by Google. They created a program called AlphaGo, if you've ever heard of that. It famously beat Lisa Doll, the world Go champion, on a televised Go competition in Korea. Changed people's perception of what a computer was capable of doing. The interesting thing is that DeepMind took that same program, that game-playing program, and they took it into the science world, and they pointed it at a problem that in my world has been top of mind for many years. It's called the protein folding problem. So you've got a DNA sequence, basic sort of O-level maths, DNA codes for proteins, but that protein, you don't know how it folds. You don't know what the physical structure is going to be from that sequence. And that's important because that determines its properties. So if you have a protein that's shaped like this or like that, it might be useful as a treatment for a virus or a cancer treatment, but you don't know unless you can know the shape. And people would spend their entire PhDs trying to figure out a shape of one protein. And the industry was moving one PhD student at a time. DeepMind took a look at this, and over Christmas a few years ago, they published the entire human proteome, 30,000 protein structures, almost overnight. It's unbelievable. It's largely unknown, but it's having a massive impact. In the same way that the first DNA was sequenced, that then leads through to massive amounts of research. So that caught people's attention. So you've got this idea of narrow and general AI. Narrow is what we're probably most familiar with. You've got an AI system that can figure out your GPS, how to get home, do all these kind of things. It's just pervasive, you never see it. But general purpose AI is both more scary and more powerful. It is effectively the AI that is equivalent to a human. So it's fun to put stuff into ChatGPT and to get an answer back, but you can put anything in there. You can put code in there. You can put business problems in there. You can have conversations about lots of different things. With 2 prompts, I created a vet GPT, which would ask me questions about my pet, my cat, any problems I had. It would give a diagnosis. It would then follow up with 3 questions to go deeper into that issue, and it would go further and further and further. This kind of tool is massive. Think about this for your own businesses. Think about something that could quiz a problem that you have, not just a condensed Google search, but something that is actually capable of engaging with you about your business, about problems and goals that your buyers actually have. And again, don't think of this as a chatbot. This is programmable. So you can take that intelligence and you can put it inside a program. So programs are typically a list of if, then, else statements, but you can have one that goes off and asks an intelligent entity something, and then based on what that something says, kicks off a whole load of other tasks. That's the power of what we're talking about, not a simple little chatbot. ChatGPT 4, which is the current state of the best in terms of all the different chat models that are out there, was actually not released, but it was finalized in August of last year. Nobody knew about it. It was obviously under covers. And they brought in Microsoft. This is where they did the Microsoft deal. They showed Microsoft this capability, and that they raised $10 billion at that point. Bill Gates came in and gave his seal of approval. But they also gave that system to researchers at Microsoft. And the Microsoft research team did a lot of work looking at things like theory of mind, empathy, multi-level thought processes, introspection almost, They came up with this YouTube video, which actually walks through this. If you're interested, you should definitely go and have a look at it, called Sparks of AGI. AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. It's when we hit a level that is equivalent to the best human. And it's already passed that on many different tests, but it's also remarkably stupid in others. Makes silly mistakes, makes things up, hallucinates. So we're not there yet. And the general prediction, if you'd asked people about a year ago when we would hit AGI, it would probably be about 50 years, sometime in the future. If you ask any scientists, when they don't know something, they'll also always tell you that it's 50 years in the future. If you ask them now, the consensus is it's before 2030. So probably in the next 5 years, we're going to hit something which is human-level general intelligence. And I want to explain this in terms of kittens and unicorns, obviously. Now, you've seen lots of amazing images that the graphics programs can create. This is what ChatGPT version 4 can create. Obviously, you're blown away, right? This is the best unicorn you've ever seen. Let me give you a little bit of context to this. This is a text-based language called LaTeX. And it's originally designed for typesetters and people who write fonts and all these type of things. So it's a vector language, and you can create shapes, so circles and squares and things like that, but also neat words. So the guys at Microsoft asked ChatGPT-4 to create a unicorn using LaTeX. And this is what it actually created. Now, it's actually quite clever to be able to do that. It has to understand the concept of what a unicorn is. This isn't a Google search where it went and found something that had been created, a unicorn had previously. They did their research. There was nothing out there that showed how you would create something like this using this tool. It had to understand the core concept of unicorn, what makes it up. Now, when the system was first launched, it's kind of raw, and what happens is they fine-tune it, which means that they give feedback with human response based on the answers that it's giving. So if it makes something up, they sort of vote down. If it says something inflammatory, they vote it down. If it makes a really good answer, they vote it up. And what you found was that as the training of this system grew over time, the quality of the unicorn went up. It became, if you like, more intelligent. It became better at all the other stuff that they were teaching it, but they weren't teaching it about unicorns. It just happened to get better at drawing unicorns, which means that it has more subtlety, it has more nuance. It has, that's a pretty good unicorn, right? Not that you would use it to illustrate a book on unicorns, but you get my point. At this point, the system is, if I gave you a manual on LaTeX and asked you to create a unicorn, I don't think anybody could do much better than that. So what does it look like now? They've released it into production, and the world has got it, right? But also, one of the things that they said was, as the training went further, as they limited it and told it not to say bad things and not to be biased and not to do this and not to do that, the underlying intelligence of the system started to fall. And a lot of the things that had seemed to get better and better started to get worse and worse. That's what production on the right, GPT-4 is now. The one on the left is GPT-3. Now, you can be scared by that, or you can be happy by that. The way I look at it is, that is what's under the covers. That's the potential that's sitting inside this thing, and they've kind of crippled it to make it acceptable to the public. So GPT-4 and its ilk and things that are coming are going to be so far ahead of what we've got or what we see that it's going to blow your mind. And this is the current tech. We don't have to invent anything new, right? Most of what we're talking about here, most of the predictions about jobs and impact on society and everything else don't actually need us to invent anything new. We just need to implement this technology, or the large corporates and companies and everybody else needs to implement it. But just bear that in mind when I mention unicorns. And then the other thing that nobody really picked up on is something called emergence. Now, emergence happens when you have a simple system and it gets very large, and then the properties of that system are not what you expect. And so, for example, if you look at a water molecule and you look at the way it interacts and all these things, you would never be able to predict oceans and waves and all these type of things. It's just not obvious until you get masses of these things coming together. And this is what happened with the large language models. Once the data sets got very large, once the compute power, we're literally talking of billions of different parameters. This system, you think about it as a simple chat, something you can have a bit of fun, create a poem. This is the most complex computer system that mankind has ever built. And you got access to it for free, right? It is hugely complex. It is hugely subtle. But strange things happen. It starts to exhibit properties and behaviors that were not predicted by the people who created it. You probably heard the stories when Bing, the chatbot from Microsoft, was first announced. They gave it unlimited number of prompts. You could talk to it for hours if you want. And when people did that, it started going off the rails. It had a famous conversation with a New York Times journalist where it convinced, or it tried to convince that person to leave his wife. It said it was in love with him. Microsoft shut it back down, but this type of property was not predicted. It's emergent. And if you do psychological tests on these systems, which you can do intelligence tests, psychology tests, you get, there's a famous one called theory of mind, which is like empathy. And people say systems can't be empathetic, but they absolutely can. The questions, for example, the Turing test that I mentioned before, somebody was going through the system and prompting it and asking it sort of questions to try and figure out levels of consciousness. Is it conscious? No, but that's a whole thing. And one of the questions that was asked at this point after a while was, do you understand why I'm asking these questions? And the chat system came back, he said, yes, you're trying to determine whether I'm conscious or not. It understood the reasons for the questions. Another one, we actually had a conversation with this in the break, which was, before it was released, it was given to what's called the red team. So if anybody's in security, they kind of know what or war games, they know what a red team and a blue team are. The red team are the guys who try to break it, right? So they'll give it a whole lot of bad stuff to do, find the nuclear codes, invade Russia, all these kind of things. I'm not sure if they give it that, but they gave it a simple task of hiring a TaskRabbit person and making some money online. And it did. It sent off a load of emails and it started having a conversation with somebody, but it hit a wall where it had to, I think, set up a Shopify account, and there was a capture that needed to be done, and at that time it didn't have the ability to look at images. So it sent an email to the TaskRabbit guy and said, can you fix this? Can you do this capture for me? And the reply that came back was, what are you, some kind of robot? You're trying to hack this system? Yes, but ChatGPT replied back, no, I'm visually impaired and I need your help. And of course the guy helped it. You're not going to sleep at night, right? This comes on to something called the alignment problem. And the alignment problem is that when we create something that is autonomous, intelligent, capable of setting and following goals, how do you keep it aligned with what we want as a society, as a company, as an individual? How do you keep it on track? How do you keep it from going off the rails? And there are whole studies about this. And there's a famous book by Nick Bostrom, which if you are really, really techie and boring, you should read, called Superintelligence, which was written about 10 years ago. But he gave a couple of different suggestions that you shouldn't do with AIs. So you shouldn't give them access to the internet. Sorry, too late. You shouldn't let them drive APIs and drive other programs. Sorry, too late. And you shouldn't give them access to human cognitive studies and psychology reports. Sorry, too late. Because how do you know if it says something that it's answering you honestly? It might be answering what it wants you to hear in order to meet its own goals. And the famous hypothesis he came up with, which was the famous paperclip problem, is that you have a factory, and your factory is designed to create paperclips, and you've just bought the latest AI, and you're going to ask it how to improve your business process, and you just give it the goal of optimizing paperclip production. The AI thinks about all the different alternatives and does that. And it effectively takes over the world, kills everybody, turns the entire planet into a paperclip factory, because that's kind of what it was taught to do. It sounds trivial, it sounds silly, but if you go deep into this and you look at any particular goals and limits, there's always ways around it. Optimize for human happiness. Oh, feed everybody drugs. Solve the climate problem. Kill everybody. You've got to be super careful. And when the thing that you're dealing with surpasses your own intelligence and the intelligence of everybody around you, then there's no way to control it. So on to happier things. Talking a little bit about what's happening in the world today. If I put this slide deck together last week, but I actually started it a month or two ago when we first started, and I've had to rewrite it almost every week because things change so fast. If you'd asked me last week what I thought of Google, we live and breathe Google. We're an SEO company, so we're driven by the Google AI system, which is a narrow AI. But they failed on the AI front in terms of the general purpose AI. I think they've got the tech, but they're afraid of what it's going to do to their business. Follow the money, right? So everybody was laughing at Google. The early versions of Bard were just no good. It just made stuff up even worse than ChatGPT. And then last week, Google made a massive number of announcements of the Palm 2 models. And they did what Microsoft did, and they said, look, this is going to be everywhere. Every single piece of Google tech is going to be built on top of these models. And these, I don't know why they've chosen animals, but it's fine. But the interesting thing here is the fact of they're all the same model, but they're different scales and scopes and sizes. So they'll have different capabilities, but they'll have the base learning. They're starting from the same point. The Gecko one is kind of interesting because it's the smallest and it'll run on a mobile phone. What that means is that you don't need a computer center behind you to do intelligent things. You don't need the internet to be connected to do things. So here's one of my predictions. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen by Christmas, but you can imagine every single toy in Hamleys, right? You know what's going to happen. They're all going to come alive. Costs, they'll follow the standard price curve. Currently, when you see the word token, that kind of means 0.75 of a word. I tend to just round it up and call it a word, but it's fine. So the problem with the moment is memory. And what I mean by that is if you ask a question of ChatGPT, either through the programming interface or through chat, you're limited to about 4,000 tokens. If you use the programming version, you can get it up to 8 or even 32. But that's a problem if you want history. If you have a lot of data, say you want to feed it your entire corporate database, or you want a massive amount of information to be analyzed, you can't just pump all of that into chat and say, tell me about it. It's a problem. And there's a technical reason why it's a problem, but it is a problem. And it can get expensive as well. It costs a lot of money to pump a lot of information. And just as people were thinking that that problem is going to be insurmountable, then a couple of the different models were released, and a couple of research papers, which just Anthropic, for example, came out with a 100K model. And the Google one, I think, is probably similar to that. So 100K is a lot. You know, it's probably several books worth of data that you can throw at it. And there's various workarounds as well. Something called LangChain and the vector models, which allow you to sort of query an on-fly database. So that problem is I think, a short-term one. Things that are not changing fast goes back to this alignment problem. Ethics, bias, accuracy, privacy, copyright, regulation. These could be entire seminars in their own right, each one of these. They are not being solved. People are trying. The accuracy levels are increasing. Privacy is an issue. If you've got corporate data and you want these systems to analyze and to look at it, you're going to cut and paste that and put it into ChatGPT? I certainly wouldn't. You've got to be very, very careful. This is where the private models, the open source models, and things like Gecko can be really interesting because they can be local. You can have your own version of these things. You can tune it, you can train it on your own data, and that data doesn't have to go anywhere. You can keep it within your own firewall. So just be cognizant of that. And I think one of the biggest problems, people have mentioned it, but the scale of this is going to be huge. We've got an American election coming up next year. Imagine, I mean, the bot farms that have been used in the past are pretty bad. But if you could imagine creating tens of thousands of capable bots which can engage in conversations, which understand the persona of the person they're talking to. They can understand the touch points and the triggers that are going to make that person vote one way or change their opinion. These can be deployed at scale easily. And if ChatGPT or OpenAI, Google turns off their systems, it's going to have no effect at all because now there's open source models that are capable, at least at that level, of running at scale and running fast. So one more prediction. The American election next year is going to be a mess. It always was going to be anyway, but there you go. So there's different things that you need to think about. The chatbot, we're all familiar with chatbots. It became public very, very quick. It's cheap. It has fantastic general knowledge, relatively weak sector knowledge. So although Jeremy was talking about Caterpillar tracks and all these type of things, yeah, it can do that kind of stuff, but you don't want it to be diagnosing your melanoma, right? You really don't want it to be deep in your SAS program and your data. But you can take these models and you can fine-tune them. And I think this is where the value is going to come next. There's going to be a flood. So you can take a general purpose model that has reasoning capabilities and you can train it on your own internal data. So this is happening already. There's a legal chatbot being developed called Harvey. You can imagine why. Suits, anybody? No. So this is one of the big American law firms. And what they've done is that they've trained that AI system on their own internal data. Not available to Google, not available to chat, not available to anybody, it's internal data. And if you think about the size of a large international law firm, every single case, every single judgment, every single judge and their opinion, every email that was sent could be part of the training data. So now when you have a case, a new case that comes on, you put it through this system, you're not going to miss things. It's going to give you the best advice. And that's going to be a leading tech for many companies. Think about the same thing in medicine. If somebody were able to point this at the NHS data, which, we have family members in that space, and the data is horrible. It's a mess. It's multiple different formats. Doesn't matter. The chat systems, the AI systems can figure out the different data. They can figure out interfaces between them. They can start pulling inferences together. Incredibly powerful. And probably the most influential or impactful is going to be education. Imagine a system that grows up with you, that knows you, that isn't on a cloud somewhere, but is local to you and protects you from all those other AIs and everything else that's out there, that understands your pains and goals and your fears, knows what you're good at, knows what you're not, can help you with that. That's the future of education. Yeah? It's wonderful. It doesn't mean teachers are going away. It doesn't mean doctors are going away. Think back to the CoPilot idea. Yeah? What this is a multiplier. There's huge potential for good here. And suddenly to give that at virtually no cost to every child worldwide through a smartphone interface. One way of going. APIs I spoke about, you need to build this stuff inside your own tech. And the idea of the App Store, this is where I think Elon Musk is going. It's where OpenAI is going. The idea of an app, one app that does everything. In China, they've got WeChat, where you can, this was pre-AI, you can do everything. It's a social media platform. You can book restaurants, all this kind of thing. This is Elon Musk's vision for Twitter, I believe. There's two reasons for him to buy Twitter. One is the data, massive amounts of data. He can stop other people accessing it. He can use it for his own AI system. But also he wants to turn Twitter into a universal app that can do anything and everything. So keep your eyes on that. And the other thing that you're going to see is this kind of idea of goals. So at the moment, you're in a conversation with the AI. You ask it a question, you ask it a follow-up question, that's fine, it stops. You're going to be able to, and we're at an early stage of this, it's nascent at the moment, but it is sort of working. You're going to be able to give it a goal. And the goal might be book a restaurant. The goal might be run a marketing campaign. And instead of squirting back 5 steps that you need to book the restaurant, it will go off and do stuff. And it will do stuff by calling other agents, by using the APIs, by calling other AIs. So it'll query the booking.com site if it's a flight, it'll book, top table, it'll find out, it'll check your calendar, it'll send an email. And these are things done in the background. And then an hour or so later, you'll get a ping, say, yeah, you booked for this restaurant at 5 o'clock. And this idea of a goal, what's the goal? Break it down into subtasks, break those down into different subtasks, find the best tools to execute each of those different tasks, set them, monitor them, and get them done is super powerful. And it's not science fiction. There's a whole load of tools out there. Microsoft are building something which they call Jarvis. I think people are just getting crazy with these names. But you can do this stuff at the moment. There's baby GPT, there's auto GPT. Honestly, they're not very good at the moment. They break. They go into little tailspins and get lost. But that's just because they've only been out a few weeks. All right? This is going to change so fast. In terms of the players, just a few things. I have to mention Dharmesh because he's brilliant. And he's doing wonderful things with ChatSpot. If you haven't looked at chatspot.ai and what HubSpot are doing, then just go and play. It's still in early alpha release. But the idea there is you're going to be able to talk to your HubSpot database and chat with it and create things. Most of our team and I've gone through certifications until I'm blue in the face, and one of the longest ones is the reporting certification, right? If you need to produce client reports, you need to know how this system works. It's complex, it's difficult. It's hours and hours of training. You don't need that anymore. You can go to ChatGPT and say, I need a report that does this, this, and this. Put it together as a pie chart, and I want to as an Excel export as well, and then save it into the HubSpot system so everybody else can see it as well. And that's the vision that you're going to get with this. And he's building APIs into other systems, so you can query keyword data, you can look at conversion rates and all these type of things. His goal, I think, is to build a front end to HubSpot that you can just talk to. And he's doing kind of well with it. If you haven't seen 11 Labs, 11 Labs do voice. And voice is kind of scary, amazing. It is so natural. Hear me speak, I have pauses, I swallow, I'm just getting over a cold. That's what you get back from 11 Labs. You get the ums and the ahs and the, sorry, and the giggles and the talk. That's what you get out of these systems now. It is genuinely almost impossible to understand that this is an AI. And it can read text and just talk to you. You're going to see CoPilot from Microsoft rolled out on their 365 platform very, very fast. You'll be able to create PowerPoints. You'll be able to create emails. It will have read all of your existing emails. Imagine, I get probably the same as people here, several hundred emails a day. Show me the top three that I need to answer right now. The ones that are trivial and but need to be just acknowledged, send an email back and answer those as well. Yeah, and put the rest into a to be looked at later folder that I'll never look at later. Amazon are in this space. Google, as I said, are coming up. Stable Diffusion and Midjourney are the two vision. There's also DALL-E and various others that sit on top of those engines. But Stable Diffusion is an interesting one because they're open source. So they do large language models and they do image generation, but they also publish their code so you can build your own. And they work, interestingly, with governments. So you'll have a Brit GPT, potentially, that is focused on all things Britishness, if that's a good thing. But also they'll work with Kenya, they'll work with India, they'll work with these other countries so that you have a focused around culture, around people. Yeah? And ultimately down to the personal level, like I said, to the student level. Prompt engineering is a thing. And there's whole memes about all of this, but if I could summarize, there's one prompt here that I kind of use, which is kind of cool, and obviously you've got the slides, so you'll be able to see this, but this falls into the category of asking for help. You can ask GPT to create a better prompt, which is kind of meta, if you see what I mean. I want to ask you to do something. Show me how I should ask you, and it generates a prompt, and then you can go into a loop where you just ask it to improve that, and you can get much better results by doing that. Excuse me. Be specific. First thing you should ever say to a ChatGPT system is you should position it. 5 minutes? You should position yourself. So you should say, you are a marketer. You are a salesperson. You should give it some context. Be nice. How many people say please and thank you to their GPT? Seriously? Yeah, I do. I always do. And I get told off from the team that I'm nicer to ChatGPT than I am to them. This is a real thing. There's a study done that if the system, whatever you want to call it, gets into a mental state where it is stressed, it can get stressed, the answers that come back become distorted and more polarized and more biased. How scary is that? So be nice to your AI. And there's a whole thing about being smart, which I could go on forever, but if ever you ask a question and you get a good answer back, ask it if it could improve that answer. It will reflect, it will review what it's done, And the second answer will always be better than the first. Massively so, where if you look at it on intelligence tests and things like that, if you get it to reflect before committing to an answer, it can jump 10% up in terms of results. Quickly, don't use it for content creation yet. We're doing a lot of testing on this. We don't know how Google, there's lots of reasons, but one of the things that I always go on about is you want content that is remarkable. This here, you can't see it, this isn't GPT, this is a briefing document that one of our team put together that we give to a writer to create a blog post. This isn't a blog post, this is the instructions on how to create a blog post. Yeah? The research that goes into this is huge. We spend a massive amount of time and work and effort creating this. ChatGPT doesn't have the data and the knowledge and everything else to be able to do this at this level. It will create content for you, but it will be mediocre, and the world is going to be flooded with mediocre content. Be remarkable. Funding. Level 3, Series C funding is falling through the floor. That money is going into startups with AI. Like that. Smaller companies are going to proliferate very, very quickly. Google has 135,000 people. Mid-Journey, 12. Let's have a quick look at Mid-Journey, and I'm probably running out of time, so I'm gonna leave with kittens, right? Because that's what I said I was going to do. So let's look over the years of how image generation has actually progressed. And the first one is slightly scary, right? It's some kind of nightmare. This is Mid-Journey version 1, Mid-Journey version 2, Mid-Journey 3 and 4. The prompt here was kitten. That's all. What do you think has come out? And over the years, the image creation has dramatically improved, and you can see. And timescales need to be changed. So when you talk about now, that used to be, or soon, within the next 2 years. Now is within the next 6 months. Near future is the next 18 months. And the future is anything in the 3 to 5 year range. And beyond 5-year range, nobody has a clue. So if somebody tells you something's going to happen in 5 to 10 years, they don't know what they're talking about. I got the dates wrong with the kittens. This isn't years, this is months. That's 5.1 that came out last week, the week before. That's 5.1. Yeah. Fashion, going the same way. These are AI-generated prompts. Product placement, AI-generated prompts. The rise of the CoPilot. Listen, I'm going to stop there. I could carry on talking. You've probably figured that out. I hope this is useful. It's positioned you to learn a little bit about what's happening in this space. Keep quiet, think, be calm. Focus about your own business. Put together a strategy, but don't let people play too much. Give somebody responsibility to look at AI, but don't bet the company on it because it's going to change so fast. Thank you very much. Any questions? Peter.
Brilliant presentation, thank you.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about the use of AI. What we haven't really talked about is how we could influence other people's use of AI with data. So should we be rethinking what content we put out to make it consumable by AI rather than just thinking about content?
Yes. The question is around data, and it relates actually back to something that Jeremy threw up when he was doing his interactive questioning, right? He was saying, show me the companies that are involved, and it came up with Caterpillar and everybody else. So the only way it could get that data is to crawl the internet previously. So this doesn't negate the idea for high quality content and SEO and all of those different things. It's just it's being presented back in a different way. There's a whole discussion and play around that says, how do we influence the AI? And there's also some bad actors doing things around what's called prompt injection, where you can actually put a prompt in your content and hide it and that will trigger the AI to do something when it reads it. Scary stuff. But yeah, that's a whole discussion. There's a rabbit hole that probably we don't have time to go down, but a very, very good point. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, that's a very good question, and it goes back to the question was, why do they become less intelligent when you try and align them? And the answer is we don't know. Lots of answers are we don't know. But the idea, I suppose, is you're putting guardrails and constraints on something which prevents it to go off and deploy reasoning and logic routes that it would normally use to find a correct answer, and you're cutting off those routes. That would be my suggestion. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, go for it. Yes. I think Zuckerberg is I mean, sorry, carry on. Is there a question? Yeah. The comment is the lack of feedback from Facebook, and not quite true. Facebook released an image recognition model a while ago, which is largely because they're building a virtual VR metaverse type world, which nobody wants anymore, and didn't really want in the first place, to be perfectly honest. But I think they will pivot. I think they have a massive amount of, well, the things that you need: money, data, and compute power. So they're going to be a player in this. Yeah, if you think even in the metaverse world, the idea of an avatar which is intelligent and capable to interact is super powerful. So I think they will be a player. Listen, I think we've run out of time. I really appreciate you coming along. Thank you so much.